Get your dirty hands off that mahogany. You're staining the brand. The voice didn't just carry across the lobby. It sliced through the expensive silence of the Aurelius Tower like a serrated knife. It was 10:15 a.m. on a Tuesday in Atlanta. Sunlight streamed through 40-foot glass windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing around Elijah Brooks. Elijah, wearing a faded gray jumpsuit with a name patch that was peeling at the corners, paused. He held a rag in one hand and a bottle of wood polish in the other. He wasn't actually the janitor, but to Julian Thorne, the 32-year-old CEO of Thorne Tech who had just stormed out of the elevator, he looked enough like one to be invisible. Or worse, disposable. Julian adjusted his Italian silk tie, his face flushed with the stress of a failing merger. He needed a punching bag, and the old black man polishing the front desk looked like the path of least resistance. "I said move," Julian snapped, snapping his fingers inches from Elijah's face. "And take that trash bag of a jumpsuit out the back exit. You're fired." Elijah set the polish down, slowly, deliberately. He didn't look at the floor. He didn't look at the exit. He looked straight at Julian. "I don't work for you, son," Elijah said, his voice a low rumble that sounded like gravel moving underwater. "And this ain't a jumpsuit. It's a flight suit. Retired." Julian laughed, a sharp, barking sound that made the receptionists flinch. "Flight suit? You look like you just crawled out of a sewer. Security!" Two guards, contracted and nervous, stepped forward. They knew Elijah. They liked Elijah. He came in every Tuesday to check the structural sensors in the basement, but they needed their paychecks. "Sir," one guard whispered to Elijah, "please, just go outside." Elijah sighed, the sound of a man who had seen empires rise and fall while he was just trying to do a job. He reached into his chest pocket. Julian flinched, expecting a weapon. Instead, Elijah pulled out that same battered black flip phone. The hinge creaked as he opened it. "Code blue, Skyline, immediate." Julian sneered. "Who are you calling? The union? The sanitation department?" He stepped closer, invading Elijah's space, smelling of peppermint and entitlement. "You have 5 minutes to get off my property before I have you arrested for trespassing." Elijah didn't back up. He checked his watch, an analog diver's watch with scratches on the bezel that matched the scars on his knuckles. "You got it wrong," Elijah said softly. "I ain't leaving, and it ain't gonna take 5 minutes." The lobby fell silent, the kind of silence where you can hear the AC vents humming. Julian glared, his ego bruising. "Is that a threat?" Elijah shook his head. "It's a forecast." He looked up toward the glass ceiling of the atrium. 3 minutes. Julian turned to his assistant. "Call the police. Get this senile old man out of here." But before the assistant could touch her phone, the coffee in the mug on the reception desk rippled. Just a tiny circle of waves. Then the glass vase of lilies next to it began to rattle. "What is that?" someone whispered. The vibration moved from the desk to the floor. It wasn't the rhythmic shaking of the subway train, it was the chopping, thumping percussion of displaced air. Heavy air. The sunlight streaming through the atrium roof suddenly flickered. Shadow, light, shadow, light. The roar became deafening. It wasn't coming from the street, it was coming from above. Julian looked up, his mouth falling open. Through the glass roof, the silhouette of a matte black helicopter hovered like a predator bird, its rotors slicing the air with terrifying precision. That's military grade," the head of security muttered, backing away from Julian. "That's a Black Hawk. No, that's a ghost hawk. Stealth variant. Ropes dropped from the skids, slapping against the glass.
Before Julian could process the physics of what was happening, 4 figures rappelled down the side of the building, shattering the side access windows with a synchronized crash that sounded like an explosion. Glass rained down like diamonds. The figures swung into the lobby, boots hitting the marble floor in unison. Thud, 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 thud. They were dressed in full tactical gear, faces obscured by ballistic masks, rifles held at the low ready. No patches, no flags. Just the terrifying anonymity of absolute power. Julian stumbled back, tripping over his own expensive shoes. What is this? I'm calling the mayor. The lead operative didn't even look at Julian. He walked straight to Elijah, who was still standing by the reception desk, calmly wiping a smudge of wood polish off his hand. The operative snapped to attention. It wasn't a standard salute. It was a closed fist over the heart. An old gesture, rare, specific to units that officially didn't exist. Commander Brooks. The operative's voice boomed through a modulator. Asset secured. We are ready for extraction. Elijah looked at the operative, then slowly turned his gaze to Julian. The CEO was shaking now, pressed against the elevator doors, his face the color of old paper. Commander? Julian whispered. You're a janitor. Elijah walked over to Julian. The tactical team shifted, their barrels tracking Julian's every twitch. I checked the sensors, Elijah said, his voice quiet but heavy enough to crush a man's spirit. Because this building sits on top of a secure server farm that manages half the defense contracts on the East Coast. I built it. I maintain it. He leaned in closer. And that dirty jumpsuit you talked about? I wore this when I pulled 2 pilots out of a burning jagged ridge in '93. It's got more honor in the stitching than you have in your whole bloodline. The lead operative stepped forward, handing Elijah a secure tablet. Sir, the Pentagon is on line 1. They want to know if the threat level requires a localized shutdown of the city block. Julian gasped. Shutdown? No, I have investors coming. You can't do this. Elijah took the tablet. He looked at Julian, seeing the fear, the realization, the total collapse of arrogance. Cancel the shutdown, Elijah said to the operative. There's no threat here, just a misunderstanding. He paused, looking Julian up and down. And a vacancy. Elijah turned to the head of security. Escort Mr. Thorne out. Revoke his clearance. If he wants back in, tell him he needs to submit a request to the Department of Defense. As the security guards, the same ones Julian had ordered around minutes ago, grabbed Julian by the arms, the CEO didn't fight. He just stared at the old man in the jumpsuit. Who are you? He stammered. Elijah didn't answer. He just clipped his flip phone back onto his belt. The operatives formed a phalanx around him, moving him toward the shattered window where an extraction harness was waiting. As the wind from the rotors whipped Elijah's gray hair, he looked back one last time. I'm just the guy who cleans up the mess, Elijah said. And with a signal, he was lifted into the air, leaving Julian Thorne in the ruin of his own lobby, learning the hardest lesson of his life. The most dangerous men in the room are usually the ones you don't bother to look at. As the Black Hawk banks away, disappearing into the Atlanta sun, only the silence remains. But before you scroll to the next video, I've got one mission for you. If you want to see more justice served cold and underdogs biting back, hit that subscribe button right now. Elijah's story is done.
but the next reckoning is already loading. Don't miss it.